Greetings and welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow, and we are here at Studio 130 in the ITR headquarters in Central Iowa for another fun-filled, action-packed episode of Iowa's most entertaining conservative podcast. We've got everyone's favorite John Hendrickson and myself here today. So welcome, John.
Thank you.
Good. You've been itching to get going. Well, this is an afternoon recording. We usually go in the morning, but you've been ready to go all day, right?
I have. I've ever since this morning when I got in, so I'm ready.
Well, it's podcast day.
Yeah.
So good. So to start out with, again, our construction update of what's going on in the courtyard. And briefly, because I think some folks are getting a little tired of this, even though we have to live it every day. But one thing I haven't laid out for folks is that this is happening pretty close to right outside my office window. And today is pretty much nonstop concrete saw.
Yes. Yep.
So we got the Bobcat out, and the whole team is out there working. We've got grass seed down on just dry soil that there's no way anything's happening with that. But yeah, just cutting concrete blocks all day. So it's been fun. Are you enjoying it, John?
I am. Yeah.
I love the sound pad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got me on the board and the host, and we got the tile saw. That's been going in my ear all day. So it's great. So now we're over here in the studio. It's not quite so bad. And
No.
we'll get it going. Okay. Little update on something we talked about in the last episode, which is the Trump indictment. I think we actually undersold just how many charges were against him and the significance of all of them on that episode. But I think as we speak, he is appearing in federal court for his initial hearing and his initial plea in this case. Is that right, John?
Yes, I believe you're right.
Okay. I still have not read the entire indictment, nor do I plan on it. I'll defer to some other smart legal minds to tell me what I think. And I still, the thing that I am left with of all that is that it feels very selective, that this is politically driven because others have done some pretty similar things and never been charged. Specifically, Hillary Clinton had countless State Department documents, which are most certainly classified in nature, that she was storing on a private email server that she ended up smashing with a hammer. And that's okay. We're not even going to take a look at that.
No.
But we're going to immediately threaten the former president, with hundreds of years in jail.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. I got it.
Yeah. No, I think there's I haven't read the indictment either, but I think there's a case to be made that there's a lot of politics behind this. And I bring up the question of why not others. As
right.
Vice President Biden had documents.
They were in his Corvette in the garage, locked.
Yeah. And,
okay.
And I'm not sure what kind of documents that former Vice President Pence had, but it just seems like there's a double standard here, and
that would be the first time there's ever been a double standard applied to President Trump.
Yeah.
No, I think that's all correct. The one thing in a piece or two that I read is that it was actually the obstruction of justice charges that they think may possibly stick to President Trump. And it wasn't that he had the documents, but that he did not cooperate with DOJ, which again, I still feel did Hillary Clinton cooperate?
No.
I mean, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's all happening while we record, but we got some other stuff to talk about. So we're going to keep rolling, John. You sent me an article today about Ukraine that I think you were pretty upset about. And the more I think about it, the more I'm troubled by. It'll come as no surprise to our regular listeners, John, that you and I are maybe Ukraine skeptics.
Yes, yeah.
And I suppose that we are going to get lumped in with all the pro-Russia and all that, which I hope is not the takeaway from that. But that there's a lot of unanswered questions about what's going on in Ukraine, why we're there, and why we need to spend so much money on it. But So you sent me this article from Michael Rubin from American Enterprise Institute, and I'm going to let you frame that.
Well, basically, to sum it up, the article argues that United States should consider giving tactical nuclear weapons to Ukraine and President Zelensky. And I just think that would be a disaster, and it would further escalate this war that's going on. And I mean, we've given billions to Zelensky, and a lot of that's unaccounted for. And we've also given other military resources, whether it's ammunition or tanks. And I know the president talked about F-16s. I don't know if they were actually delivered or not, but I mean, I think that idea is, and I think I understand what he's arguing. He's thinking that it's probably if Zelensky has tactical nuclear weapons, it'll deter Russia, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, rewinding to a very basic level, the entire Cold War was premised on the doctrine of mutually assured destruction.
That's right. Yeah,
we got nuclear weapons; they got nuclear weapons. Either side uses this, and we basically incinerate the whole world. And hard to say that didn't work. I mean, I think there's some historians that might have some nuance to that argument, but we did not blow each other up.
No.
And so the idea being that the ultimate deterrent is owning and holding nuclear weapons. And that has worked for other nations, notably Israel, that have nuclear weapons. So the author argues that we should put nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and that will deter Putin, that the threat of a limited strike. So there's a couple things here. One is just there's a flawed premise in here that I'll get to. But think about, and John, we've touched on this before, is what gave rise to this conflict, which was NATO expansion and aggression in the area.
That's right, yeah.
Now, it could be empire building by Putin too. I don't want to discount that. But make no mistake, we have antagonized the Russians time and again in the region.
Yeah.
And maybe it's money here or monkeying around in elections or giving weapons or putting Hunter Biden on a corporate board or whatever it might be that we're doing in Ukraine. Yeah. But we've been involved in the area that has antagonized the Russians.
Yeah.
I mean, we're here getting worried right now that China has spy operations in Mexico, and we're getting all upset about that. But it's okay for us to go do whatever we want in Ukraine. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this would be the ultimate escalation. I mean, what was the Cuban Missile Crisis? And I'm not saying that that's apples and apples, but you park nuclear weapons on somebody's front porch, they're going to get a little upset about that.
That's right.
But the other thing is just this argument's internally inconsistent on its face. He sets the stage for it by a couple of points about Putin is that he's become very erratic and unpredictable. And that said that right in there. And that Vladimir Putin doesn't abide by any red lines in this conflict. Well, it seems to me that those would raise real question marks about whether the nuclear weapons would have any deterrent impact at all. If you've got a Vladimir Putin that really doesn't care about what may happen, then why are we going to... that's the ultimate roll of the dice.
Yes, yeah.
Well, maybe they'll work. If not, we just will have a pretty significant nuclear exchange in Europe. Great. So... it's so reckless.
It is, yeah.
And it goes, and I don't want this to be the Donald Trump show, but he made a comment. We played it on the podcast a while back when asked on that CNN town hall about Ukraine.
Yeah.
And he said, I will have it ended. Now, whether he can end it in 24 hours, I doubt it, but whatever. But the point is, why isn't our foreign policy seeking an end to that conflict?
Yeah.
Everything we have done has been an escalation.
Yeah. Well, and I saw an interview the other day. In fact, I think it might have been on one of Tucker Carlson's Twitter monologues, and basically he showed Lindsey Graham over in Ukraine, basically saying, this is the best money we've ever spent.
Yeah.
And the United States, there's a large faction in both political parties that would like to see this escalated, and
Right.
it's still that, what I would call, whether you want to call it a neoconservative foreign policy or liberal internationalism that had dominated so much of the 90s,
Right.
and whether it be Republican or Democrat administrations, and they want to see this escalating. Whereas I think President Trump and some of the others, and I think even Governor DeSantis has fallen on kind of an agreeing with us that the United States should be trying to broker some type of negotiated settlement and looking for peace instead of escalating this, because the question is, what is the strategic interest for the United States in this conflict?
Why do we care more about this than the Europeans do?
Yes, yeah.
Explain that to me.
Yeah. And what you said before is absolutely right, because even if we look at the coldest Cold Warrior, such as John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State in Eisenhower's administration, Dulles and Eisenhower never thought that NATO meant a permanent United States presence in Europe, and no one ever thought that NATO should be escalated onto the doorsteps of Russia, and so, as you mentioned, we have been involved in Ukraine, whether it's through internal revolutions there or trying to get them to join NATO. All that would be a great mistake, and so we're just provoking Russia. And the real threat, I think, is not Russia; it's China right now.
Right.
And I think it's we should be focusing on China more than on what's going on in between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
And we should be trying to do what we can through diplomacy to broker some deal.
Yeah. We should do a foreign policy episode after we get done with your immigration and trade policy episodes. But, I still think we've lacked a coherent foreign policy in this country for maybe as many as 20 years.
Yep.
I mean, we had, the premise post-World War II was the Cold War and containment of the Soviet Union, and then it sort of transitioned into this American hegemony anywhere we can get away with it.
Yeah.
And then we finally realized this isn't going to work, especially after our misadventures in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. And now we're left with this still this latent idea that we need to be active and strong and policing the world, but yet there's no idea or what comes after that or what end we're trying to solve.
Well, and there's, once the Soviet Union fell and the Cold War ended, I mean, there was a strong argument, unfortunately it didn't happen, where the United States should, in a sense, come home. And I don't mean become isolationist, but sort of pull back. And so NATO was a perfect example. There was some that were arguing at the time that if NATO expanded, it was just going to provoke Russia, which exactly is what happened. And so now we see pressure to expand NATO, which it already has with, I think about Finland has joined now, and there's growing pressure to get Ukraine involved, and that's just that it's not, and the whole idea of that, the United States can still be a global leader, but we don't have to be trying to transplant democracies and nation build. That's not that shouldn't be a foreign policy objective. And,
nor was it ever one for NATO.
No.
I mean, NATO was a counterweight to the Warsaw Pact.
That's right,
which the whole premise of that ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the downfall of the Soviet Union in 91. And it turned into just this sort of, organization to allow the United States to continue to project military power in Europe.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
But to what end?
Yeah.
That's all. That's my question: is to what end?
One thing, one thing I really thought that the Trump administration did right with NATO is it basically they told NATO, start paying your fair share for your own defense.
Absolutely.
And we have been subsidizing, Western Europe for so long, and they've in turn built up these lavish welfare states. But look at what France has done. They're getting closer to China. at our expense, and so, but yet they continue to expect us to subsidize their own backyard and their own defense, and
I'm done.
So,
It's just not a value proposition unless somebody else can explain it to me.
Yeah.
And I'm no really advanced student of U.S. foreign policy, but I understand a few things.
Yeah.
And I just don't get what our goals are with our foreign. Now, with regard to China, then I think we can have a conversation where we need to be.
Yes.
I think that is still largely with the obvious exception of Taiwan, but largely a trade, intellectual property type of a it's almost more of a financial conflict than it is anything else.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Should we actually turn things around to something a little closer to home?
Yes. Yeah.
So you have a piece that you've recently authored, John, that I think we've teased out a little bit on this show, but is talking about, we've talked at length about all the great things that we've done in Iowa, and that our neighbors to the north, Minnesota, is actually done the exact opposite.
Yes.
And so you got a piece about that. So I'm going to let you spend some time on that.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I co-wrote this with a colleague from another think tank, John Phelan, who's an economist in Minnesota. But basically, we thought it'd be interesting to compare Iowa's legislative session with Minnesota's, because you have two neighboring states, and as you and I were talking the other morning, Chris, there is some cultural similarities, some common history between Iowa and Minnesota in terms of the German Scandinavian influence that happened. And Minnesota, I would say, probably has been more of a progressive state than Iowa, but that's not always the case. But what we saw is really two contrasting legislative sessions, and what it boils down to was really two contrasting political philosophies and visions. And I think it actually, kind of shows what direction the nation might go into. And so, just to give you an example, in Iowa, we've talked about the numerous tax reforms that the legislature and Governor Reynolds have done, as well as keeping a lid on spending. But also, on the social side of it, Governor Reynolds and the legislature has really responded to fighting this woke ideology. This cultural, I call it cultural Marxism, but the opposite has happened in Minnesota, where they had a record close to an 18 massive budget surplus, I believe $18 billion, and most of that was just blown by one-time spending and tax credits. And basically what they did is they've increased spending by over 33%.
Wow.
They and more radical than that is they launched a very radical social agenda. And so, for example, abortion is now legal up to the moment of birth. Sex changes for children have been legalized. They legalized the recreational use of marijuana. Illegal immigrants will be granted free college, health care, and driver's license.
There's a lot of deep blue states that haven't gone that far.
Yes, yeah. And their education is shifting away from traditional education towards more indoctrination, and they passed basically, I would say, what they would consider criminal justice reforms, but basically going to be soft on crime. They have radical environmental policies, which our colleague Isaac Orr has predicted might even cause blackouts this summer because of their extreme green energy and Green New Deal type legislation. And, what was happening in Minnesota is being cheered on by, former President Barack Obama tweeted out that, look to Minnesota as an example. And so, we called it the cold California. And Iowa's been compared as the Florida North, but there's really, two models here to look after, the red state model of Iowa, the blue state model of Minnesota. And, really, Governor Reynolds has done the exact opposite as Governor Tim Walz in Minnesota. And I think this is going to foreshadow kind of what direction the nation is going to take, because, you think about it, you have two neighboring states that have have a lot in common, but it's just what's unfortunate is that the DFL, the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, took control of state government, although by a slim margin, and basically they acted like they had this huge mandate. And I have a suspicion that a lot of greater Minnesota does not support this radical agenda that's been shoved down their throats by Governor Walz and the DFL.
Well, if I remember right in the piece, John, they only have a 1-seat majority in the Senate.
In the
DFL
Senate,
does,
yes, yeah.
And yet they were able to run all of this through.
Yes, yeah.
That's really stunning to me.
Mm-hmm.
When we took the trifecta in Iowa, we usually had pretty broad majorities. There was one year where the House majority was, I think, 53-47. We were still able to get good things done. That was the year we did judicial nominating reform. But we've had pretty wide majorities. So you can lose a vote or two, but they had to keep that entire Democrat caucus locked up on all of those bills. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's impressive. You would think that one of those people, one of those senators, would be in a swing seat and a little bit concerned about what would be coming in the next election, but yet they didn't.
No.
So, I mean, from just a raw politics of it, I mean, tip of your cap, they were able to lock their caucus up, because I wish at times we had that level of fidelity to conservative issues in Iowa.
And it was all extreme. I don't know if this passed, but they were considering a bill that would appoint a commission to redesign the state flag, because the DFL and the governor argued that the Minnesota state flag was a symbol of white supremacy. I mean, it was just, everything was being attacked in that state, and versus what was going on in Iowa was completely opposite. We've seen the legislature and Governor Reynolds, they've protected life. They've Governor Reynolds has been very prudent with taxpayer dollars. The legislature and the governor have basically through whether it's the Students First Act, which created universal ESAs, or past education reforms that are tearing down barriers to families being able to choose what school their kids go to. I mean, it's just two completely different visions, and I think that's one thing we can, by looking at these two states, it's sometimes I think we can get frustrated because we might not think things are getting done as fast as we'd like to here in Iowa, but really, Governor Reynolds and the Iowa legislature have really done a good job of upholding and protecting, defending traditional values, promoting common sense, fiscal conservative policies, and making our state more competitive with a more competitive pro-growth tax code, and versus Minnesota, which is not only the tired old tax and spend progressive agenda, but now it's going full-blown cultural Marxism, which really concerns me.
Well, it should, and it should that it's this close to home.
Yeah.
We're here in the middle of the country, and with the exception of Illinois, surrounded with states that all sort of feel like us and have similar politics. And we can say, well, that's, our politics isn't like California. Mm-hmm. San Francisco is different, or New York City's different. Like, we don't match those, but it's far away. But now we have here in the middle of the country two neighbors, and we already know Illinois is a basket case. But here we get to okay, this state decided to go down the red state path. This state decided to follow the California model, and we'll find out which one works, and we'll find out what the people like. Now, these liberals in Iowa love to say, well, this is terrible. I'm moving to Minnesota. Or I'm moving to okay, go. Find if that is the life you want, then look, I like Minnesota too, John.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place. Maybe there's people that like it here in Iowa. In fact, I know there's quite a few, because we continue to grow. Yeah. Things continue to work well. And I will gladly stand behind those set of policies, because I'm confident that in the end they're going to work here. Yeah. And they're not going to work there.
That's right. And, Minnesota almost lost a congressional seat because they're losing population. I mean, people are leaving that state, and that's something the DFL doesn't realize. And look at what was Governor Reynolds, a 19-point margin
Yeah.
she was reelected by, and so and look at the response of people responding to the open applications for the
Right.
ESA
Over
students first.
15,000, I think.
It's incredible.
Right.
And because people are sick and tired of what's going on.
Right. I got a real kick on that. These Democrats and liberals are lamenting that, oh no, it's going to maybe cost more than we thought because all these people are applying for it. I'm like, so your real argument is that this new law is way more popular than you thought.
Yeah.
Oh no, this thing that we've been railing against is something that the people really wanted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Whatever. I guess you gotta find an angle on it some way. It's in the governor to her credit. It's like, yeah. It's
But the other thing, looking at these two states, it just shows, and it's a point that you've raised many times, just how much of a leader Iowa is in terms of good public policy.
Yes.
And I'm not just here in our region, but nationally. And so I would say, there's a lot of attention that gets placed on Florida, but I think Iowa's actually doing some just as good as Florida, or even better.
Yes.
I don't know how many people that I've talked to at really like Governor Reynolds.
Yeah.
People in different states that have tremendous respect for what she's doing and the courage that she has to stand up to fight liberalism.
Yep.
That standing up and you know what? It's not. It's just she is fighting for common sense things.
Yes.
And that a great majority of people support.
Yep. And to do that, she has the courage that of her convictions. This is what I believe.
Yeah.
She is confident that that's what the majority of the people of Iowa want. Yeah. And she's just going to fight for it.
And I don't know if
it's so basic, but yet it's so incredibly refreshing in our politics.
Yeah, and I don't know if I know I'm right on this, and
I know you're right.
But but I tell people, they say, how are you guys getting stuff done in Iowa? And I don't want to leave out legislators, but I'd say it's the leadership of two people.
Yeah,
Governor Reynolds and Senate Majority Leader Jack Whitver. Yeah. And I take they're both been tremendous conservative leaders, and that's I think a blessing for our state.
Yep. Well, it is a legacy that we all get to share in. So it's wonderful. So, well, good. Well, we're going to have a link to that article. It's actually up at Real Clear Policy. So we'll link to that one right now, John, but check it out because it really is an eye-opening read. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you, listeners. Thank you for being a part of the show today. Thank you, construction workers, for shutting off the concrete saw for at least the majority of our show here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell your friends. And with that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.